Hello, everyone. It's 2022, and this is the first episode of Talking Kotlin. I'm trying to be very, very professional here with my intro. That Seb that doesn't come back and say, "Oh, you screwed it up again." Hello, Seb. How are you doing?
Hey, how are you? That was a pretty good job, honestly. A
It was
couple
good,
of
right?
critique points, but for this show, it's up there.
And so, how's your January been so far?
It's been just amazing. So I took some time off and I came back to, I think, 180 Slack messages that were unread. Luckily, it turned out that about 110 of them were U-Track notifications telling me something is overdue. So
Yeah,
that was okay.
But, I mean, I love how you put I took some time off. Like you literally, this is your second day of work, right? You took the entire month off.
Well,
so
it was also my first vacation of the year, so
oh, it's your first vacation of the year. Oh, yeah. Okay, wow, that's great. You're starting well, right, from January. So our guest today, which I'm going to allow you to introduce, said to me beforehand, said, do I need to prepare anything apart from the weather report? So
nice.
Like our fame has become so damn good. So who's our guest today?
We're talking today to Yigit Boyar, who can introduce himself because we didn't plan this out beforehand.
Hi, I'm Yigit. I work in the Android team, mostly on these libraries we write for Android developers to write Android applications, and we've been using a lot of Kotlin. So we're talking about that. Sorry, when do I report the weather?
Wait, we're gonna ask you.
Oh wait, I'm sorry about that. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So yes. How's the weather where you are?
So I'm in the Bay Area in the United States. So it's cold. It's 5 degrees Celsius. But that's also because it's very early. It's 8 a.m.
Oh, wow.
So it's going to be a nice, beautiful 18 Celsius almost today.
Oh, nice.
I'm excited. It's been very cold here.
Because I was looking at that dead panda in the corner of your room, thinking what is it, too hot? Well, apparently it's too cold.
It's the winter sleep. It takes a while.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you're basically in the same kind of climate as I am, right? It's 6 degrees in the morning and then gets to a nice 15, 16 degrees
I'm
Celsius.
Very jealous.
We're not interested in your weather,
I know,
Seb, because it's always cold, dull, and cloudy.
It is. When I went outside today, it was nice and mild, and by the time I came back, I literally couldn't see 5 meters because I just had snow stuck to my glasses. It was quite the adventure.
Yeah, they keep
I felt
asking
like
me,
a polar explorer.
And people keep asking me, so how come you didn't end up moving to Munich? There's why. Not you, Seb. I mean the weather.
I might play a little bit of a role, right? But
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, tell us a little bit about what you've been up to lately.
So lately, we have been, we introduced Kotlin, whatever, 5-6 years ago to Android, but it's a hassle to change the primary language in a large ecosystem. So recently, last couple of years, we've been focusing more and more Kotlin. So from the Kotlin perspective of things, we've been actually trying to move libraries to Kotlin. Now, Kotlin is amazing where, if you're using Java, you can still use Kotlin. That's great. But you also, if you are using Kotlin and using a library in Java, it's kind of doesn't fit. The APIs are not like Kotlin. They're okay, but they're not the great. So we're trying to change it around where we move these libraries to Kotlin. So they look great from Kotlin and not that great from the other programming language. Which is a big challenge because you have to do this without breaking your APIs. So if someone was using it from Java, it still works today. So in terms of Kotlin, that's one thing. And of course, we closely follow everything else in the Kotlin world as well, from the new Kotlin symbol processing. So we can hopefully forget about KPT and just use a much faster processing line for our database library, or other things making libraries that maybe not only work on Android and somewhere else too.
Yeah, I think some people forgot about capped even before KSP.
Love at first sight.
What were your origins in Kotlin? Like, how did you come about with Kotlin?
I do so like before Android, I did like a lot of web development, and before that, I did a lot of Flash. I don't know if anyone used like Flash and ActionScript here. Or maybe it's like too old.
No, I know what it was. Seb doesn't. He wasn't even born.
What do you mean? I'm the generation that grew up with Flash games, you know?
Oh,
Like cool
wow.
math games, whatever, all that kind of stuff, you know? I've only heard good things about Flash, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't know where you get your news. I want the same source. But it's like Flash had this language ActionScript, which was like, you know, I think like really, really good language for the time. And then when I started writing Android, I'm like, what is this? I mean, I wrote Java before, but you know, it's not the most loveliest language, let's say, when you're coming from there. So I always looked at alternatives. Like I tried Ruby with Android, like Scala. That was very promising. So I spent some time like trying to use Scala on Android. And when I joined the Android team, I was like, I'm going to convince them to have Scala standard library in the framework so you could use, because like it was huge, so you couldn't really practically use Scala. So I'm going to convince them. And this is, when did I join? I think I joined 2013 to Google, or 14, something like that. So anyways, what happened with Scala is I kind of forget what I wrote after a month. Like it was just very hard for me. And somehow I think like around 2014 I found Kotlin, and I remember like the front page of Kotlin had these sneakers on the photo. As like
Oh God,
this
I
is
remember
not
that.
professional, but this coming from Jetpack, so I'll take a look at it. And that was kind of it. I did enjoy it a lot. What happened? Don't get too sad. It was your idea. It's good.
I like Kotlin website used to be on Confluence, and when I started to do like some helping with product marketing, I put it over outside of Confluence, and I was looking for some hipster style image, and I found those sneakers. You actually remember the shoes? Jeez.
Yeah. I mean, it is very hipster, but like when you try out of languages, you kind of, you know, a hipster language is not necessarily what you want initially.
Now we need a tuxedo. Kotlin is enterprise. Now we need a tuxedo with a suit.
Yeah, please, to make more serious. But anyways, then like in terms of Google, okay, so the thing is, I do believe I have the first Kotlin commit in Android.
Wow,
so
really?
I'm super proud of. I mean, didn't fact check, but it's very, very unlikely someone else merged in the Kotlin code before I did. And that happened. So we were working on this thing called data mining. So I said like Flash and Flex had this thing called data mining. You could just like bind stuff from your XML, which also happened to have XML like Android. So we were working on this thing called data binding, and like gotta generate some code. And to generate some code, I think it was called like free marker XML. I forgot that there was a way to generate code. Like this is before Java Poet and Kotlin Poet was a thing. So you really didn't have a good like code generation library. So I convinced Chet Haas and George Mount. So like Chet was my manager, George was lead. I'm like, look at this thing. Instead of using a templating language, why can't we just use Kotlin here? And that's where I could squeeze it in. So they didn't let me write any of it in Kotlin except for the code generation part because it looks like a templating language. I'm like, cool, I'll buy that. So that's how it started. I looked at the commit, it's 2014, like sometime in December.
Nice. And then how did it kind of spiral from there?
Oh, no, I cannot claim the credit for that one. No one really cared. No, I mean, maybe I can claim some credit, but like, I think, you know, we don't really live in a bubble. So people start seeing this more and more. Like over time, George started liking it. So one by one, you get more people talking about it. I remember talking with, I think, Roman those times, like about this new language JetBrains is working on. And then eventually we started to take it more serious. The Android community started picking it up. And then the rest was, I think, when did we announce it? 2017?
Yes.
Okay. So like around like probably end of 16, beginning of 17, like we started seriously looking at this. I mean, adding a language to an ecosystem is a very, very difficult decision, because if it doesn't work, you cannot roll it back. So it's just like kind of a one-way street. So we did a lot of scrutiny around like this language, like can this thing succeed? A lot of work, a lot of funding, of course, to support that. But it all worked out. In fact, so we announced Kotlin in 2017. We also had a bunch of like new set of libraries. And for those libraries, we couldn't use Kotlin, but all of the code written for those libraries that doesn't ship in the client were written in Kotlin. So by that time, we were able to use Kotlin unless you ship it onto the device. And with that official release, and a couple of years later, now we are allowed to ship Kotlin into the device. It's very complicated. Like when you write the library, you don't want to have dependencies that will upset your customers, even though they might be wrong. You just don't get to say that. Customer is always right. So that's why it took us a while to like, we use Kotlin a lot, and now we can finally just write the libraries in Kotlin for the last 2 years or so.
I mean, during this time until 2017, when you made it official, surely folks from the Android community were coming to you and saying, "Why aren't you supporting this if you're actually using it yourselves?" Were you having these types of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I remember a lot of Kotlin critics were, look at the Google code. They're not using Kotlin, hence it's going to fail. And I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like a lot more complicated than that. We did have that conversation a lot. Frankly, I mean, it's very similar like Google internally. So Google Apps matter a lot for us, obviously. And internally, Google had like, I think 4 languages approved to use in the whole Google repository, 4 or 5. And getting one more language into there is like a months-long process, plus funding. So it's not that Google engineers don't want to use it, it's just they're not allowed to use it, period. So those things take a very long time when you're like a big established company. I'm not going to go into the reasons of that. Like, I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but we could have also ended up with Scala if it wasn't so strict. That was like my initial plan when I joined the Android team. Hopefully no one took me serious.
This could have been talking Scala, I'm just saying.
Yeah, who knows? So when all of this started, did people just kind of like they learned about it and then they kind of got on board immediately, or was it a long and hard process of convincing people internally? Were they really adamant and said, I'd rather not? Is it really worth it? What kind of conversations did you have to have there to really get it going?
Oh, they're oftentimes difficult conversations. I mean, eventually when you're like an ecosystem of years, you have to be very, very conservative on what you add there. So it's not too different than what we see in the public. And like, Kotlin is syntactic sugar. I'm like, no, but it's also nice if it is syntactic sugar. Or there was a lot of performance concerns. And the worst part of this, they're not necessarily like founded by facts. It's like, oh, that must be slow. So that was one of the things. Now, parts of it was possibly right. Like, compilation is slow. Yeah, like the compiler does more for you. It's going to take more time. There was one common complaint, IDE performance, which I think is probably still a complaint, but that was a concern. All these like very smart things you do, you should just not make them that clever. Like, people compare like how you can edit Java code or like use VS Code much lighter, and they just don't have the features and they're cool with it. Maybe like the kind of conversations, like I don't want to discredit them, and there is always a lot of concerns. There is the problem of like, especially at the time, it was just the language of JetBrains. You could just, sell to some other company that doesn't like Google, and not to name names, and we'll be in a very difficult situation. But like as part of this effort, there was also the Kotlin Foundation that was established. So you kind of make the executives feel not too uncomfortable with this change. There was a very valid concern. You just grind this over time, like one by one. Just get to like I remember actually Steph, who was our director of product at that time. Like one day, so she used to commute from Seattle to Bay Area. And one day, like we were just talking to her, and she said she spent her flight writing Kotlin code, and she was very excited. And if you can get them to write Kotlin code, like that's the key to convince people. Just use it, and if you don't like, okay, you'll take it back. And almost no one ever did that.
Yeah, someone once asked me, like, you have this functionality in the IDE that is convert Java code to Kotlin. Don't you have the reverse? I'm like, no one's really asked for it. I mean, you could just roll back your commit if you don't like it. But
so yeah. There has been discussions around that actually too, because I don't think they went to anywhere. But if you're this company, there's like a very, very strict rule on what dependencies you can add to your application, and Kotlin doesn't make the cut. There was discussions about converting it back, but that never happened.
So talking about the libraries, I mean, I can imagine even making a library, for one target audience. I mean, if you're in JavaScript, you make it for the JavaScript folks. You make it in Java, you make it for the Java folks. Okay, I mean, there's maybe other languages that could use it, but how did people feel about the quote unquote extra effort of having to do this when you started to write these libraries in Kotlin?
The part also in the Android X or Jetpack, whatever, like we call these libraries Jetpack. Let's put it that way, because no one really knows the real name. But there we have a couple of there's around 100, 200 people contributing to the code base. So we have some guidelines on how you can have these public APIs, they get reviewed, whatnot. So when we're introducing Kotlin, we just need to have these guidelines. Okay, these are the things you do, and these are the things you don't use. For example, extension functions, which are great, but we tell people, okay, whenever you use an extension function, you need to make sure it looks nice from Java as well. So there's some API suggestions that if you were just targeting Kotlin, you would do it, but now we tell you not to do it. Or as even harder, when you're converting an existing library from Java to Kotlin, you need to keep it binary compatible so that if someone is using it and they update the library, it still works. They don't need to recompile anything. And for that to support, using properties, whatnot, is not always trivial because of what Kotlin would generate. So kind of sometimes old write Kotlin Java style. So it is a learning, but to be honest, the direction is mostly other way around, where people want to move their libraries to Kotlin and we're telling them to stop. Please don't yet. We are not ready to do this. Now, we need to make sure our API tracking is working properly, our documentation is working properly. You have to prepare all those things. And the same discussion goes for anything futuristic in Kotlin too, for things like Kotlin multi-platform. We have this whole custom pipeline of API tracking. In fact, how do you even do API tracking in multi-platform? I have no idea. But until we figure that out, we cannot ship libraries and then potentially break people. If there's a potential to break people, I'm sure we're going to break somebody with just too many clients.
So the first question here is, you did mention a guide. Is this just stuff that you have internally, or is that something that the community could reference somehow?
Unfortunately, most of it is internal. And there has been many discussions to can we make this public, because they don't necessarily need to be internal. All of the tooling is open source. So the tooling that we have some links, but most of them I check more manually. All the documentation, API tracking, these are all open source, but they're not really products. So you cannot just easily grab one of them and use it yourself, which is something we've been talking about a lot. But when it comes to prioritization, that's not very easy to do.
And then my other follow-up question would obviously be, Well, you did introduce Kotlin in some parts of the whole ecosystem. Why these parts? What makes them different, and how do you tackle in that context? How do you tackle the problems you just mentioned with everything from API tracking to binary compatibility?
No, I mean we implemented those things, like all the infrastructure to track those. I mean, we already had binary compatibility tracking. The problem is that it was kind of based on the, I think, what does UAST? That's the thing that's coming from JetBrains. The
PSI?
not PSI, UAST.
Oh, okay, UAST.
Yeah, so it's based on UAST, and it worked fine with Java. As we moved to Kotlin, we found a lot of bugs that like it didn't support. In fact, I think we are going to pull it back to PSI and just write anyone that doesn't use UAST, because apparently it's okay to represent the common, but it's not good enough to represent what you will see from Kotlin. It's something like that. I don't understand these very well. I'm just talking. So we wrote those things, but we don't also go and blindly move a library to Kotlin because it's cooler. You still want to have a reason. So it's like one of the good reasons is coroutines. In Android, for so many years, we suffered from not having a recommended way of doing concurrency. We just didn't. Because it's RxJava, executors, Guava, but we didn't have anything. We couldn't say people use error with this. And then we made that call like a year or two ago. We're like, you know what, everybody use coroutines. We're going to use that. And once we did that, that became like any library that does any asynchronous work, instantly you have a very good reason to move to Kotlin. So we moved this library we call paging to Kotlin because it like heavily uses streams internally. That helped a lot. So it's like we're moving a couple more libraries, but there's always a good reason they're going to benefit from Kotlin.
So you talk about coroutines, and I mean, for folks that aren't aware, still after 5 years, I am not an Android developer, but I have heard a common kind of like I wouldn't say joke, but a meme in the Android community that, you know, every year there's a different way to do asynchronous programming, and Google recommends different things, right? What, like, from your perspective, how was the uptake when you kind of like set out this guidance to folks to say, now you do it using coroutines?
Well, I don't think we ever recommended 3 different ways. We just didn't recommend anything.
Okay, I mean, the samples was using something, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I think that has been like super challenging, and we tried to tackle this. So I think 2016 or so, because there was like RxJava was picking up a lot, and we did like a UX research. So we do those things like beforehand. We did a UX research on developers using RxJava or like other concurrency solutions. Like, you know, try to understand. And the results were really negative, as in, I mean, there's nothing wrong about RxJava. It's just people struggle a lot. Apparently, there's many people who don't spend all of their time coding, or they're not like super into this. So that's how like some of those initiatives failed. When coroutines came around, we thought is kind of the sweet spot of like easy things are easy to get done. You don't necessarily need to understand. Doesn't mean you do it right, but you don't need to understand it kind of works. That's the bar we are trying to hit. You know, you don't need to know all this like reactive streams theory to use these libraries. That was the main thing for us, that, okay, this, you know, we can validate that this is doable. And then it goes back to, okay, we'll tell this to people, but we're not going to tell people to stop using whatever they're using. That's just not cool. So then, like, okay, how do we write the interrupts, which is pain in the neck. So like we write this library, for instance, like another library is called data store, like just a simple key value store. It's written in Kotlin coroutines. And there's an Rx version of it where you wrap every single API yourself as a library so people can use it that looks like a first-class citizen from Rx. So there's like this very, very significant overhead of doing this. You change one API, especially during development, there's like 6 files get updated, like, you know, Guava, RxJava 3. You know, it's just a lot of work. I don't want to complain about work here. It's not the goal. But like the considerations of like being able to say, okay, this is it, is a huge relief, but it's still a lot of work. It doesn't change the fact that we need to support all these things.
And do you feel that coroutines has really kind of delivered on that initial kind of promise that you extracted, where you said, well, this is the way that makes things easier, or to maybe to get started easier without needing all the theory?
Well, the jury's out on that. I can give you my perspective. I believe it did. Now, of course, like many people in the Android team have different goals. Like usually my perspective is, can we make people write decently working apps without like being amazing engineers? And I kind of want to lower the bar. Like that's usually what I personally focus. It's fine. It's not as efficient as it should be. Like want it to work to the end user. So from that perspective, just doing something asynchronous in Kotlin is where you can copy paste. I mean, I love suspend functions. Just looks synchronous. You like. I think that lowers the bar so much that it's fine is magic and people don't understand because it's fine. Like we write a lot of code that we don't understand and that's okay. They don't need this. So in that sense, I think it did deliver. Now, when things get more complicated with structured concurrence and whatnot, we see people getting confused. But that's fine. They would get confused in any reactive streams library. Like I don't think is as big as a deal as like people make on Reddit. So I would say like A, not an A plus maybe, but A or even an A plus.
But do you at the same time, do you think that it's becoming more complicated?
True. I mean, as more libraries are not adopted, it will become more complicated. But I don't think there's too much around. Like I think the simple usages of Kotlin coroutines is still very simple. Like today, if you want to use Compose, the new like asynchronous library, the new UI library of Android, getting into a coroutine scope is just like one function, and now you can call in a suspend function from that. Oh, actually, that was one of the biggest things I liked very early on, that you couldn't call a suspend function unless you're in a suspending scope. That in a coroutine scope, that's a huge change because we get all these bugs on Android where someone makes a database call on the main thread. And the like application stops because the file system is like, and like it worked 20 times they tried, 21st time on the user's device, it doesn't work. It happens all the time. Like actually preventing people from being able to call something in my book is a huge win, even though it confuses them on like, why can I call this method?
It's a valid point. Very valid point.
Yeah. And one last thing, like, was it 5-6 years ago, there was another UX research we did, like asking people what is hard on Android. Now, this is like before Kotlin, before any of the like the additional libraries we had. And the top of the list was threading. Even like all the problems of Android, the top thing was people just didn't get threading. And so we don't expect people to get that. You just like, it's okay. Probably we all know it like half, at least myself. Just want the tools to work good enough. And like anybody advanced, like I mean, anybody advanced, they're free to choose whatever they want anyways. So we don't like force feed people coroutines. It's like, you don't know what to do, use coroutines.
And copy and paste this segment of code, right? Essentially.
I mean, isn't that what we all do? I mean,
exactly, right? Let's all be honest with ourselves,
Maybe Copilot can write suspending functions, who knows? You said that coroutines makes it possible for people to write well-functioning apps without diving too deep into like the more complex stuff. What does that look like maybe with your own applications that you folks write? Do you try to keep things very simple? Have you gone all in on like all the advanced stuff that Kotlin and the library ecosystem offers? What does that look like?
Well, it is. So from like in Android, we don't really have apps, or at least like the group I work in where we focus on writing libraries for people. We don't really have apps, so we never get to fully do that. That being said, we work very closely with like Google Apps and other Android apps that you'll find on your system. on those instances, especially at the scale of Google, like Google already had these like giant abstractions for all of its apps to do concurrency. So what they did was they started migrating them. So first with bridges, and then it's very similar for those groups where you say, okay, now we also support coroutines, but we will never rewrite all of Google with coroutines. It's just not gonna happen. So we like all of the usages are in a way that can interoperate properly. We don't get to go like super deep on what coroutines provides. On the library side, though, like if all the flow API scoping, and I think that was one of the biggest things when I say like people can write code that's not going to misbehave. There's very simple things like with the structured concurrency, we give people use this scope if you are here. That's the like if you're in an activity which is like a screen on Android and you want to do something asynchronous, there's a scope we give to you. You use it, we're gonna cancel your work when you don't need it. And that just happens automatically. That kind of cleanups matter a lot. And that's why like I really like coroutines.
Do you actually find that you get, I mean, I don't know how much analysis you do in terms of crashes of applications, or do you have, if folks submit their feedback around this, do you have any data on that? And have you seen that reduce at all?
I'm pretty sure we looked at it, but like as part of the migration, like we did have some numbers around it. They must be public. I don't know the top of my head.
Okay.
There was definitely now this kind of data is like hard to trust. You cannot just say, oh, someone moved to Kotlin and their crash rate is like 5% lower. Maybe just be a correlation, or maybe they're like a better developer. Then like there's sort of so one metric we were seeing. So for all these libraries we ship, we look at which applications use it on Play Store. So that's something we can like track unless they strip the information. There's a huge correlation where we ship a new library. You see like 95% of the users already on Kotlin, even when the library is not in Kotlin. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these libraries are better from Kotlin. It usually means, well, if someone is picking up a new alpha library, so they're very like eager to try new things, they probably already went through the Kotlin roads and like picked it up and completely migrated. So it's very hard to read these numbers.
Okay, I'm going to ask a really stupid question here. Pretty much like every other question I ask. But how tied are all of the libraries that you work on to actually Android? I mean, can people use these outside of Android applications?
They want to.
If they want to.
Yeah, that comes a lot. Some of them are and some of them are not. So this project like Jetpack, it used to be called support library. Like the whole reason this group of libraries were created was to fix the fragmentation problem on Android. So that like when a new feature comes to Android, Jelly Bean, which is like many years ago, you want to make sure it works like if on the older versions. In fact, in Jetpack, we usually support till API 14. It's like 8 years ago or something. So that was the whole reason why this group was established. Attack the fragmentation, so new features come here and we backport the old features using the libraries. Fast forward, today is way different. Now we write, we just forget about that. Like, we just write the library all in this package. It's just gonna work by itself, and it's not about backwards compatibility. It still handles backwards compatibility, but like one of the libraries we have is the database persistence library. It doesn't really have anything to do with Android. It does use Android APIs, but you have the SQLite database everywhere. So anywhere you have SQLite, technically you can run it. We haven't done the work, but I heard you have some new like exciting technology that might help us do that work.
Yeah, I was just, it reminded me of when folks are using Compose for Desktop and they're importing namespaces that says Android, right?
That's been a huge internal debate, wasn't there? Those calls are not easy, but we did. So these packages were called like Android support many years ago. and we decided, okay, clean slate. We're gonna refactor everything to this Android X package name. And we wrote the whole tooling that will like automatically refactor your app, but there's some big companies that they couldn't even complete that migration yet. So we're not changing package names anymore. Like it's just too much of a pain. So if you don't like the Android X name on desktop code, I'm so used like type at least. I'm sure IntelliJ can have some feature. We are not. It is just so painful, and we're still dealing with that. So like I'm sorry, it's not worth the effort of changing a package.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, the whole reason that we added the feature of collapsing imports 20 years ago was precisely so that people don't see Android X.
Now that's what we call foresight. Yeah,
that's great foresight. Amazing.
Gotta talk to Roman and get a proposal for package name aliases into the language, right? So that people can use something else.
You cannot change some of the decisions. So it's an API. I'm sure this happens in the Kotlin like standard library or even coroutines. So it's very, very hard to add APIs because you cannot remove them.
And this is actually a great segue because, well, if you could go back and you could change some of the decisions that you made, is there anything that you would have done differently in the journey with Kotlin?
Oh wow, that's a very tough question. These are the questions you should tell me, Hadi, like ahead of time. So
I didn't know he's going to ask that. He just came up with it.
It's all improv.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think one of the it's got hindsight, but I think we could have been more aggressive internally when pushing for Kotlin. I say like I'm like super proud. I'm probably the first Kotlin committer. But the way I get it in was like, just let me do it. I'm not claiming anything else. I don't try to push it for the clients. I actually like one of the things. Okay, this could count as a regret. The same year we shipped, we announced Kotlin support. We also announced a bunch of like new kind of libraries. Like we call them architecture libraries, but it's basically they were the first non-support libraries in Jetpack. Like, this is how you architecture, you use these libraries, things are solved for you, blah, blah. When, of course, like, we start writing them a year before that, whatnot. But like, probably mid-time those during libraries, I did have a good idea that we would announce Kotlin at I/O, like let's say like 6 months ago. But nothing was decided. Like we had a committee or not. I mean, even the committee was like not established. But I had a good feeling, but I didn't try to push for it. Like if we did, then all these new libraries are just in Kotlin. That would have been amazing because now like we're trying to move them to Kotlin, and sometimes you cannot because you're gonna break. Like we actually ask features to the Kotlin team to add so we can migrate these libraries. It's so much pain. Like I wish I was more bold, but I'm like, what would happen if the decision didn't go through and we didn't adopt Kotlin? Like we abandon all these libraries 2 days before launch.
I was saying, but at the end it worked out great and it was wonderful, and the announce was really exciting and it had its ups and downs, and so here's to a wonderful 7, 5, 10, 5 years, and to many more, I guess, moving forward.
And to be honest, I think I became a Kotlin fanboy, so I may not be very reliable source, but I think it did make a huge difference for Android, or like even for the whole ecosystem. I don't know where we'll be without Kotlin.
Wow, that's awesome to hear.
Maybe we'll be like Java 14. Maybe that would have happened.
I'm just personally really glad that you didn't say like, oh, probably we should have gone with Scala instead. So that was that was good. All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for today's show. So, Yigit, thank you so much for coming on. It was a real pleasure talking to you and walking down memory lane, even into a time before my time. I need to look up that picture of those sneakers afterwards.
This is great.
And yeah, so thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
And I hope we'll stay in touch, and we'll see you maybe in some future episode. Who knows?
Maybe. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, and for everyone listening. Let's do the obligatory nonsense that we have to do. Oh, sorry, did I say nonsense? Yes. Hit the subscribe button, click that bell,
Like the bell.
and hit the like. Remember, the dislikes are gone. Until next time.
Take care.